Yeah, and with every draft, I think you have to almost look at it position by position for depth. Some positions deeper than others. I think just in terms of the strongest positions this year, both at the top and then also the how deep it goes. Defensive line, tight end, running back. Those are the three positions that stand out above the rest as being all right. There are guys at the top that we project as NFL starters, guys that'll come in and really fill an impact role for an NFL team. But also, if you wait until the fourth round, you feel pretty good about the guys that are going to be there at that point at those three positions. Just looking at the top of this draft, it's every draft has its own identity, and a lot of times people will describe or kind of base the identity on the quarterbacks. Like last year we had six quarterbacks drafted in the top 12. And I think that's kind of the lasting memory of last year's draft. But with this year, it's going to be a little bit different. We don't have the quarterbacks like last year. No. There's still going to be guys that are going to go. Cam Ward from Miami, Shedeur Sanders, Colorado. But it's not like last year. And so it'll be interesting. The Titans at 1, the Browns at 2, the Giants at 3. How does those three picks play out? I think there's two, just looking at non-quarterbacks, I think there's two guys at the top, clearly in that top tier. That's Travis Hunter at Colorado, Abdul Carter, the pass rusher from Penn State. And then say like 3 to 12, I think it's wide open. You could sell me on 10 different guys, who should be at number 3, or another team might look at them at number 10 in terms of just the best players in this draft. And then after that, between picks 13 and 45, I think are interchangeable. So there's different tiers to this draft if you want to try and break it up. So, if you are if you're picking 5 overall, usually every year that's kind of a good spot to be. You feel good about getting a top 5 player. This year, that's just a little bit different. If you're the Jaguars sitting there at 5, I think you're looking at your options saying, well, hopefully we can trade back because we feel a lot better about the guy we're going to get at 10 maybe, and also picking up a 3rd round pick or, trying to take advantage of the depth of this draft. So it's not a weak draft. I'm not going to say that. It's just maybe not as top heavy as some other drafts are.
So just it lacks star power. Is that the way to put it? Like it lacks star power, but it adds depth, especially later in the rounds. Is how league executives would look at it.
And I think it's fair to characterize it that way. Like I said, with Hunter and Carter, those are 2 impact guys. They're going to come in, no matter if you're playing Travis Hunter at corner, receiver, both, he's going to make an impact. He has all the tools, all the traits that NFL teams are looking for to be a top 5, top 10 player at his position at some point in his rookie deal. After that, it's more projection and guys that are good, but maybe there's one area of their game that is not meeting up to standards of what usually you want in a top 10 pick. So, you want higher picks every year. Theoretically, you're going to get a better player, but not every top 10 is the same. Last year's top 10 was loaded with good players, and, the quarterbacks going really helped push some good players back. But, a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, no way he falls out of the top 20 this year. He's a top 10 pick this year, even without knowing how his rookie year went in Jacksonville. He goes in the top 10 this year just because of the way the talent stacks up. Same thing with a guy like Quinyon Mitchell from coming out of Toledo, went to the Eagles, won a Super Bowl, had a really good rookie year. No way he falls out of the top 20 if he's in this year's draft, just because it's just not as top heavy as past years have been.
The defensive line, you mentioned 3 positions. Again, defensive line, tight ends, and running backs. Let's start with the defensive line. Just the overall talent in this group, how many players you envision maybe being selected in the first round, but an evaluation of just this defensive line group as a whole.
Yeah, and saying defensive line, I'm talking about the edge rushers and the guys on the interior. So, that's great news for anybody that watched the Super Bowl and saw the Eagles get home with 4 consistently. I think that, we always look at the Super Bowl winner and how do we kind of, latch on to what they did and let's try to do more of that. Let's lean into that. And, when the Chiefs won every year, it was like, all right, well, we can't find a Patrick Mahomes, so I'm not sure what we're going to do. But with the Eagles, 2 things stood out. One is, could we get our quarterback in the second round? I think that's something that a lot of teams will look at, especially, because of the Hurts thing, but also just relative to this draft. talked about the two guys at the top with Ward and Sanders, but that second tier, that next tier, whether it's Tyler Shuck from Louisville, Dart from Ole Miss, some, they're fans of Kyle McCord from Syracuse, Will Howard, Ohio State, Jalen Miller, Alabama. I think a lot of teams will look at that second and third tiers on day two and say, let's get our tackle, let's get our pass rusher in round one. Let's get our quarterback maybe in round two. And, if it doesn't work out, because let's be honest, the hit rate on day two quarterbacks is not great. I mean, Russell Wilson, he's one of the exceptions, not the rule. So the hit rate's not great. But if we draft a quarterback in, the pick 70, we feel okay moving on next year, the year after that. We don't feel tethered to that like you do kind of with a first-round quarterback. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the defensive line. Seeing how the Eagles invested in that defensive line, what that meant for the rest of the defense. It's not like that's a landmark thought. I mean, it's always been the game of football is won in the trenches. And so getting better on the offensive line, defensive line is going to be a big thing everywhere. But especially this year with the depth of this draft, defensive tackle, we're going to see guys go pretty early, and then it's going to stretch. I did my top 100 last week on The Athletic, and I think 16 maybe defensive tackles, and there were like 8 more guys that I was like, okay, how do I squeeze them in there? Because it's just, there's so many, and not all of them are going to be able to go in the top 75 picks, but maybe they all should. And so defensive tackle depth is really impressive. And then at the edge rushers, Abdul Carter at the top. He's not a Myles Garrett necessarily type of no-brainer number one pick, but he's maybe in that next tier of prospect as an edge rusher. And then after that, there's really good depth, whether you're talking about Mike Green from Marshall is a really violent and high motor player. James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee, Mikael Williams from Georgia. The other Georgia player, Jalen Walker, I'm very high on, even though he played more of a linebacker role for the Bulldogs. His best thing was getting after the quarterback. So that makes it a little bit of a projection, but it's kind of the tools are there. He showed he can rush when he was allowed to. Let's talk about making that full-time transition. So there's a couple of question marks like that. Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, as freaky as it gets at 285 pounds, but never had more than 1.5 sacks in a season for the Aggies in College Station. So it's like, okay, we have to figure that out. Why wasn't he more productive? So there's a lot of different layers to this defensive line class. And, as teams go through this class, which they're doing right now, and before the combine, teams are getting together at headquarters. Area scouts are presenting these players. They're talking about them around the room. You're building a preliminary draft board. Some really interesting conversations going on about this defensive line.
Do you get a sense at all, Dane? It's a strong. You mentioned it, right? The 3 position groups, the tight end, defensive line, and running backs. Do you get at all a sense of a philosophical change at all with some execs in the NFL? Everyone wants to say they want to run the ball, but we've seen the running game kind of disappear a little bit. But it felt like to me, it felt like a rebirth this year with running the football. Are they starting to look at this draft? Maybe it's because of the talent level that is there that we want to switch a little bit, right? The pendulum kind of swung so far, like it's quarterback driven, it's passing the ball. Maybe we should get back to, being a little bit more balanced and running the football. Do you see a shift at all with how people evaluate now in the NFL on that? Or because of this running back class, it's so good that they just have to naturally shift that way?
Yeah, and another, ripple of the Eagles when what they did this year with Saquon Barkley. I think teams ever really got away from the importance of running the football. The conversation's been more about how do we acquire the running back that's going to lead our backfield. Can we use a first round pick on that guy? Can we give him some big money in free agency? That's where I think the conversation has shifted over the last 10 years. And then maybe it's overcorrected itself, to the point where, even look 2 years ago, Bijan Robinson going top 10, Jahmyr Gibbs going top 12. I don't think either of those teams, the Falcons or the Lions, have any regrets about the picks that they made at those spots. You look at Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, it was Saquon Barkley in free agency this year. None of those teams have any regrets about the contracts they gave out to those players. And so this year with the running, it'll be interesting with this running back class. We're going to have at least one in the first round with Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. And then how many more do we get in that first round? 2 is possible. 3 is possible. Big fan of Caleb Johnson from Iowa, Marion Hampton, North Carolina, the Ohio State kids, Trayvon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins right behind them. I'm a big fan of Jordan James from Oregon. I think one of the reasons maybe you don't go running back in a top 40 picks is because of the depth. You feel like, okay, you know what, let's wait until round 2, round 3, and get a Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, an RJ Harvey from UCF, a Devin Neal from Kansas, and then on and on. I mean, there's going to be a lot of. I went through it, and I had draftable grades on over 30 running backs in this draft. Probably not going to see that many guys drafted. So even late in this draft, you feel pretty optimistic about some of the running back talent that you could get, and so. It'll be interesting as we go through this draft, how many actually go in the first round, and then do we see a run on day 2? How do these running backs come off the board?
How high do you think that Ashton Jeanty will go?
It's tough when you do a mock draft because, and we went through this 2 years ago with the Bijan draft, when you did a mock and you're trying to figure out where he's going to go, it was hard to find a landing spot. If the Falcons don't take Bijan Robinson at 8, you could say maybe the Lions would have taken him at 12, but they really like Jahmyr Gibbs. So I don't, it's tough. This year's draft, I think it's possibly goes top 10. It's at least something that teams will consider. You look at a team like the Raiders, they need help in so many different spots. They're picking at number 6. We have a brand new GM, brand new head coach. There's a lot of newness to this Raiders team, which makes it tough to really understand where they might want to go. They have a lot of needs on that team, but running back was a pretty big need, and we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. But if you bring in a guy like Ashton Jeanty, maybe he stabilizes things for that offense. And so no matter who you put at quarterback, he's going to help the offense as a whole. And so at number 6, it becomes intriguing. After that, I mean, Dallas is the most, the connector, the pairing that we see the most with Ashton Jeanty. If he gets past 12, then I think it becomes interesting. Do we see Denver maybe make a move? You feel like you drop him into that offense with Sean Payton and Bo Nix and, what he could do as part of that offense and how that would ascend that offense even more. Washington, could we see them make a move up to go get an Ashton Jeanty? You drop him in that offense, and him and Jane Daniels on the same backfield is kind of scary. So there's a lot of interesting landing spots, and he could really go 6. He'd go 18, and I don't think either one of those spots would be too surprising.